Today we're fortunate to have with us another distinguished citizen of North Dakota, Pershing Carlson, whose home is down in the Mandan-Bismarck area.
Right.
He went into the service in World War II, was a glider pilot, shot down, prisoner of war, and following the war he returned to North Dakota and was engaged in a number of activities which he's going to tell us about. But first, Pershing, you'll have to tell us how you won the war. That's what we're going to start with.
That's a long story.
Well, we got lots of time here, so you just relax and tell where you started out and so on.
Well, I started out at Minot, North Dakota. I was born and raised at Minot, and so Minot's really my home. I went through school at Minot High School, and I went 1 year to Minot State. I call it Minot Northwestern University now, but the Minot State Teachers College in those days. Then I came down to Grand Forks, and I went to the university for 2.5 years. I completed the pre-law course down at Grand Forks.
Where did you stay at the university when you went to?
At the Sigma Chi House.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And anyhow, I went back to Minot, and that summer the government offered a course to earn your private pilot's license. I forget the name of the course. It was a civilian pilot training course, something like that. And so I got my private pilot's license that time, and that kind of changed my career as far as...
Is that at Minot or here?
At Minot.
At Minot, okay.
Yeah. And so that private pilot's license, what changed my... I suppose when World War II started, I would have tried to, ordinarily to get into a cadet program, either Army or Navy, but I was trying to capitalize on that darn private pilot license I had, and when they came in June 1942, the Army really needed glider pilots. They decided they were going to start a big glider program. They needed experienced pilots for that, and so I enlisted then in June of that year as trained as a glider pilot.
And then where'd you go?
Well, I started out at Fort Morgan, Colorado. They had what they call a dead stick school up there. We had in our class, most of them were private pilots, the same as I was, but we also had some washed out Army cadets. They got out as far as basic and washed out, and we had those fellows with us too. And so all we did up there was really take about like 30 hours of basic aeronautics. And
Classroom or in the air?
Classroom and in the air, both. And the thing that I remember about that the elevation was more than 6,000 feet. And here I've been flying in North Dakota, you know, with down a lot closer to sea level than that. And like up at Minot, we'd take a small aircraft up to, you know, in a hurry or something, you take it up to 1,800 or 2,000 feet, wouldn't mind doing a couple of spins. You had to, but boy, down there you had to take up to about 5,000 feet, and you do a 3-turn spin, and you're right in the deck already. That was a little different. But anyway, we didn't have any gliders at all then. And so at the end of that time, they sent us down to Wickenburg, Arizona. Wickenburg was a dude ranch capital back before the war, and they did a lot of glider soaring down there. And that place had soaring gliders, and that's where we got exposed to gliders. And believe it or not, after a few weeks of that, they proclaimed us glider pilots. They took us in, and we had a little ceremony, and we got rated as glider pilots. We had, at that time, even seen a big glider.
This was in Wickenburg now?
This is Wickenburg, Arizona, yeah. And so all from then on until they got the big gliders finding manufacturers who would use them for training, I went to a variety of pools, and one place was Kirtland Field in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And they had AT-11 and AT-17s. They were small, light twin-engine planes they used for training bombardier cadets. And so I flew co-pilot in those for a few weeks till they got some bigger gliders. I got sent down to Lubbock, Texas. But again, the big gliders didn't catch up with us, and got sent to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, of all places. And again, we flew light aircraft down there just to keep in practice, but no big gliders. It wasn't until April of 1943 that I ever saw a big glider. But they sent us then to California. Oh boy, I'm trying to remember the name of the base now. Well, it's beside the point. It was up in the mountains up there, a little bit north of Los Angeles, northeast of Los Angeles. And there we got exposed to big gliders for the first time, and ran us through the glider school.
That's the type of glider you took into combat.
The CG-4A, yeah. Was a
Now,
glider we
what
used
is
all
this?
the time.
What is this one here, by the way?
That's a CG-4A.
Yeah. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. This CG-4A was it was made of plywood, aluminum, and fabric, just like light aircraft have on it. The thing was about 48-foot wingspan on it, and about a 40-foot length of fuselage. They were rated to carry 7,500 pounds load, but unfortunately we had most of the time a lot more than 7,500 on them.
They had two pilots?
We had, they were made for two pilots. Yeah, the two pilots rode right up there in the nose. But as the war progressed, we got short of glider pilots, so I ended up flying 2 missions by myself. And in fact, my last mission I was beside myself. And
did you have a so-called co-pilot or a engineer?
Co-pilot.
Yeah, you had a co-pilot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, how many men were on that? Combat men.
Combat men with full gear, we carry 15 of them.
15.
But the glider was made so that the nose lifted up, and you drive a Jeep. You raise the tail, and you drive a Jeep or a small tank or a little self-propelled gun or something like that in there. So a lot of times that I never took a glider like this with 15 men. It always had a Jeep or some equipment. In fact, the day I got shot down, I had ammunition back there. A load of ammo.
Well, tell us more about your training now, Pershing. Where you?
Well, we.
You went to that place in California.
I'm still trying to think of that town out there. It was a town later on. I think now that the airfield there's called George Air Base. Oh, yeah. And it's been where they did a lot of flying with the early experimental rocket planes. And anyhow, we got through there, I think in May, and we got sent down to Bowman Field in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky, and started. Then we had to take commando training, and which was something we hadn't really counted on. We signed up to be glider pilots, so we thought we were going to be pilots.
Bowman Field, that's right next to Fort Knox, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very close to Fort Knox. Yeah, and so we had all these doggone people in there. Next thing we knew, they were pushing us out of loaded trucks and things like that to toughen us up. And I remember so well that had a swimming pool there, a big swimming pool, and so they said, you're going to have to dive in this and go all the way underwater to the other side of the pool. And most of us said, heck, we couldn't go across that pool on top of the water and say now they dive under it. But anyhow, before we got out of there, we did that, and they taught us to swim underwater, and they taught us how that we had a high platform. They put diesel fuel on the water and ignite it, and boy, you had to dive off there full pack and splash water ahead of you because there were living so many people at that time from ships being torpedoed and people falling into the water and the burning water, not being able to. But if you can splash water ahead of yourself, you can create an area to get out of that mess.
Did you do that then, or? Oh
yes, sure did. Yeah. I tell my kids about some of the things they did in here. I didn't regard myself as any hard-boiled tough guy at all like that. But I tell you, before we got out of that thing, why they had us down nice and trim and well equipped for our future experiences. And then about that time, we had quite a setback in the glider program. They had an invasion the first time they'd used American gliders in the island of Crete, I believe it was, and the whole.
That's in the Mediterranean, yeah, between Africa and
and Italy. Yeah.
And Italy there.
Right off Italy, yeah. And they begin with, they should have called the mission off because just terrible winds came up, and the gliders got scattered all over. It turned out the mission was a success, not because of it was tactically right, because the Germans were so confused where the gliders were landing back of them, in front of them, and everything else, and some of the German units surrendered. But it could have been just a disaster completely. But anyway, it was so severe that...
Now, were you in on, you weren't in on that?
No, I was back in the States at that time.
You were back in the States still, yeah.
And so, boy, there was this question of whether the glider program was going to survive. There were a lot of high-ranking people who thought that this was ridiculous, you know, to try to get people in. But fortunately for us, any way you want to look at it, there was a colonel there by the name of Mike Murphy, who was a glider pilot, an old stunt pilot before the war. And he talked the higher-ups in the military to letting him take a handful of selected glider pilots and take them down to Fort Benning and train them, and he put on a show. They had like a...
Now, Fort Benning, that's south of Atlanta there along...
Yeah, it's down there near...
big Army base
yeah, big airborne base, yeah. And anyhow, they had a kind of a program. They had these dignitaries they invited, they had a stage set up and band playing on one thing or another. At the end of the program, while they turned on the floodlights, and here they'd landed 30 gliders back of the stage, pitch dark, while this program was going on. So they showed how these gliders could have just, you know, loaded with troops. They could have just overwhelmed this place, and nobody even knew they were coming in. Yeah. And boy, that really impressed things. And so suddenly the glider program was revived, and we went on then to we did a lot of training with the big gliders, a lot of night work, and a lot of airborne people we took that used gliders to acclimate them to aerial, you know, invasions, things like that. So anyhow, that was kind of the story of our training, that the gliders were, we considered them expendable, and boy, they sure had to be, because right in training we just ruined a lot of them. That we had, one of the requirements was down at Camp McCall, was one of the places we went into. They had a circle, 600 feet in diameter, and they had steel posts around it, and each of these posts they cut off pine trees about 30 feet high, and so you had this ring, this 600-foot circle ring with pine trees, and you had to land a fully loaded glider down there in this 600-foot circle. If you couldn't do that, why, you didn't go any farther in the program.
In a 600-foot circle right. Diameter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
was this Camp McCoy, you say?
Camp McCall.
McCall, okay.
Camp McCoy, not Wisconsin. This is in North Carolina.
Okay.
And boy, we ruined a lot of gliders down there. It just broke your heart, because those gliders cost between $9,000 and $12,000, and in those days, as you recall, that was a lot of money. Yeah. But anyhow, that's how we trained, and that's what we ended up doing. And then we started going overseas. Sent quite a few fellows to the China-Burma India Theater. They used gliders over there to build roads and for some few invasions against the Japs, but most of us they sent to England to get ready for D-Day in the fight.
You sent many over to Africa?
Sent a few to Africa, yeah.
But most of them went to England?
Most of them went to England. The ones to Africa, we did mount one pretty good invasion from Africa when we flew into southern France in, I think it was in August 1944. Otherwise, we flew everything out of England until, well, during the war. Well, then we flew out of the continent. But
France.
We flew D-Day, Normandy invasion out of England. We flew the Operation Market Garden, which was the biggest aerial invasion ever tried. That was one in Holland. That was didn't work out too well.
Now, how would you train for this? How would you train for a mission like that? How did you get that glider up in the air anyway?
Well, we used basically used C-47 aircraft, which was an old civilian DC-3. It had been around since about 1939, and surprisingly, it with very few major changes through all the war, and they kept on using those darn things. In fact, I think they're probably still flying them down in some of the South American airlines.
Yeah, there's a picture there that you see where there's they're pulling the glider. That's
that's the
C-47.
That's the C-47.
And he's pulling one.
And
is that a nylon rope he's got behind there?
Yeah, that's a nylon rope. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the distance about between the airplane and the
150 feet.
150 feet.
Yeah. Now sometimes we used a double tow, and in that time we had one cable was longer than the other one, so the gliders weren't side by side. There was one trailing the other one, sort of.
Now, how did you pick up that glider, or how did you get started from the ground?
Most of the time we just from a regular airfield that they just towed them out with the Jeep and hooked them up, and they had them all lined up so we'd take off in formation, sort of, you know.
The plane started down the runway and just pulled the glider.
Yeah. We had another way of getting the glider in there too, was what they called a snatch operation. And it was we used quite a bit during the war. It was used to in those days, you know, we didn't have helicopters for military aircraft, and sometimes you maybe took an important prisoner of war, or maybe you had a high-ranking intelligence officer or something like that that you needed, or high-ranking officer was wounded that you needed to get out of there. And so they used the glider to, they'd land and they'd set up like 2 cane poles.
Like a clothesline.
Yeah, like a clothesline, put a loop over it. Then the C-47 was a specially equipped hook in the back, tied on into a clutch, slipping clutch, and they'd come down, they'd literally snatch you off the ground.
How'd that work?
Worked pretty good. Well, you went from nothing to 125 miles an hour. So you couldn't have anything all loose in the glider. It'd go right straight through it. And you had to have your head back on the head brace. I had a good friend of mine that was killed. He, just one of those terrible training accidents that they were all set to snatch his glider. In the meantime, some C-47 was going cross country and wondered what was going on down there. So this guy flew down and flew over the operation. Well, this friend of mine that was flying the glider, he thought that the glider, that the C-47 had been his plane and it missed him. And of course, so he turned around, looked relaxed, looked and saw his cargo was, and about that time the right C-47 hooked onto him and just snapped his neck and he was gone. But that's the way those things happen. We had a lot of accidents.
How many planes and gliders did you have on an operation there from England over into the continent?
Well, I don't know. We had.
Of course, you had different ones, but I mean.
I just have to say, man, no, we had, like in our squadron, we'd put up between 12 and 15 gliders for an invasion, and our squadron was 4 squadrons in a group, and there were at least 4 groups over there. So just a little simple arithmetic. There were several hundred of us.
Yeah.
And we didn't all go at the same time, of course, but we had pretty good luck with the gliders in Normandy. They worked well for us.
Now you knew this was a one-way mission.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, that's the way we were trained, and we knew that. And our job, of course, was to get out of there, to land and get our load in safely. That was our mission. But then when time to get out and try to get back for another mission. And so this worked pretty well. It worked surprisingly well. That we had a few casualties in D-Day. We had a few casualties in southern France, and we had quite a few casualties in Holland invasion. They called that Operation Market Basket. There's been a lot of old books written about that. Shows, maybe you've seen the show "The Bridge Too Far." It was based on that place. Kind of a disaster. It didn't. Weather turned bad, and we were supposed to coordinate with the thrust with the English ground forces. The English couldn't. They didn't quite have the right equipment to get in there to us, and the weather turned bad, and it was a disaster. The English especially took a terrible licking in the Holland invasion.
What did those gliders carry? Most of them. Or what?
Well, they carried on D-Day, where I flew an English glider. That the English had a bigger glider than we had, and it was a harder glider to fly. And just the last minute, and the American glider pilots had a lot better and more training than the English glider pilots had, and so they put some of the English glider pilots in our gliders. We took some of theirs, and those English gliders, they landed faster than ours, and they'd smash up on the ground if you made a rough landing. My boy, they were pressed paper out of, and if you stuck a wing in the ground or something, boy, it just crumpled, you know. And like our glider, if you stuck a wing in the ground, you could ground loop or something and stop it short if you needed to. But I talked to a lot of people on the ground after we'd made our Normandy invasion. They said, "Oh, you poor guys in those gliders, it's all smashed up." They all were. But the truth of the matter was, there were some people hurt at landings, but the gliders looked terrible, standing on their noses and one wing off and things like that. But most of the guys walked away from them.
Now, did you come down, when you come down, did most of the gliders, were they damaged quite a bit when they hit the ground?
Depended on, like I was saying, Normandy, it was just terrible. The fields were real short and there were hedgerows.
Yeah.
And just about all the gliders were ruined in Normandy. But in, like for Holland, we had quite a few wide open fields, so a lot of the gliders were used in the Holland invasion were salvaged and used again later on. You asked me about the load that I took infantrymen in. Well, they were communications infantrymen. I never did know exactly what they were doing. They had a lot of radio telephone equipment with them that I took into Normandy. And but in Holland, I took General Gavin, the commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division. I took his Jeep in. And then the day I got shot down in Belgium, I had ammunition for their artillery in the ground. I think it was 135 millimeter shells.
Boxed up.
Boxed up, yeah. And then the last thing, they come with two little small boxes, and they said, these are fuses for the shells. They said, put these in a safe place. Of course, in a glider, where's a safe place, you know? But we had what they call flak vests. Maybe you had them too, and I don't know, but in that particular mission, I didn't have a co-pilot. In fact, I was the only one in the glider, so I took the spare flak vest, and I took the other one that I had on, I took and I wrapped them around those doggone boxes of those fuses. I figured that if they got hit by a flak vest, it wasn't going to do me any good. And boy, I got that terrible. We had just a disaster that I got shot down, but that's another story. I don't know if you want me to go into that or not.
Well, you might as well start tell about the day you were shot down there.
Well,
the glider is an interesting aspect of the war, and you mentioned some of them were salvaged. How did they get salvaged? How did you get them back to England, or did you just use them from there?
No, we snatched them out of there.
You did?
Yeah, and took them back to the airfield in France. And they had, I don't know, I've heard that they had said 5,000 gliders over there. I don't know if that was accurate or not, but we heard that figure thrown out.
And who made those gliders here in the United States?
Well, Ford made the most of them. Most of the gliders after were made by Ford, but there were others made by one company even made coffins. Switched over their production to gliders during the war, but there were several companies that got contracts to make gliders. They were all made the same specs. And most of the gliders are pretty good. Early on, the first gliders we had weren't too, had a few bugs in them, had to be worked out, but when we got overseas, we had good gliders. And a glider could take a lot of abuse, and still you could get your load down safely.
Say, I noticed on this picture of the glider that we looked at, it has those white markings on it. Could you explain those, please?
Well, those white markings were on all aircraft, all Allied aircraft, as I remember. They put them on about D-Day. We just put ours on just before D-Day. And I guess it was just some way to distinguish us from other aircraft that might be in the area. But this was the same markings that our C-47s had on them. And we were at some other airfields there where they were flying P-51s out of there, and they had them on. And I don't know about the P-17s or the 24s. They have them too.
Well, you can tell us about the mission that you were shot down. How about the briefing, and how would you be briefed, and so on, and so forth?
It was.
Where was your base there in England?
Well, this time we moved over to a place they call Chateau d'Un in France. It was southeast of Paris, about 70 miles, I guess. And it had been an old, it had been an airfield the Germans had before. And it was a comfortable place to be. And there wasn't an awful lot for glider pilots to do between invasions. And we got, after the invasion of Holland, all of us got to leave. And we'd roam around the countryside there and visit with the people, and some of us had motorbikes. We'd get out the outskirts.
Now, the war was going on east of you there.
Yeah, oh boy, the war was going on good. But then, as the winter came on, why they suddenly started, Patton was stretching his line so fast, and they were running out of ammunition and gas and medical supplies and everything. And next thing we knew, our squadron was literally flying around the clock. So then they put the glider pilots in as what they called third pilots, and the C-47s. What we did was raise and lower gear and help the pilot, but it would give one pilot then a chance to rest because of this schedule they had. I hate to say it and recalling it, that I was kind of halfway relieved when they called us out this Bastogne mission. That one thing was that they kept on saying that after a glider pilot flew 5 invasions, he'd get rotated and get a chance to go home. And so this would have been my 4th, and so I figured this is a good one to go on. It's probably a milk run, you know. But boy, it didn't turn out that way at all. That our squadron was, the 94th Squadron was the day that I went in on the, it started the day before to haul to resupply the 101st Airborne at Bastogne. They were cut off there. And first flights that had in there was practically uneventful. But apparently the Germans figured out what we were doing, and the next day while they were waiting for us, we came in, and our squadron was just shot down completely. The glider pilots, there was one glider pilot that hid in the ground for about 2 weeks and got out of there. And the rest
Were you shot down before you landed?
Oh, yes. Oh, man, yes. Yeah, we never got to Bastogne.
Oh, you never got there?
No, got about 5 or 6 miles away. And we had, so all the rest of the glider pilots were either killed or captured, along with quite a bit of the air crews. It was too, we were coming in low. The air crews couldn't bail out. Some of them tried to, but didn't have very good luck. And
you were being pulled then by the C-47,
oh, yes.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about your ship? Tell about your experience.
Oh, boy, mine was, I saw we were in trouble. We had an uneventful flight going into the drop zone, but from about 25, 30 miles out, why, we saw the battle area. Of course, this was something you'd always see, a black smoke,
yeah,
you know, from burning buildings and artillery shells, and a few shot down planes or shot up tanks, you know, the burn make a lot of black smoke. But I saw an unusually large amount of black smoke, and boy, I knew we were in for it, and got there, and the flak was bad. I thought it had been bad flak before, but I didn't know what bad flak was.
Flak, that's the anti-aircraft fire.
Anti-aircraft gun, yeah. Just instantly, why, my aircraft was towing me both these, fire coming out of both engines, and coming way back, just about back to the burning gas, coming back, just about back to the glider, you know. And about that time, the glider got hit, so I cut loose. I figured that there was no chance of getting out of there, you know, except try to get to the ground safely. And so it caught quite a bit of small arms fire on the way down.
What about the plane now? What happened to that?
The plane bellied in, but he bellied in on the American side. So the plane that took me in, the crew got out. The airplane was ruined, but the crew walked away from it. But anyhow, I didn't. I landed the German side, and my glider was on fire by that time. That I know somebody said they had some kind of phosphorus shells they were using, but I don't know what started on fire, whether it was burning gasoline from the C-47 got on it or what. But and then I got hit right below the bottom of the thing, so I could look down between my legs and see the ground down there. And I thought for one wild second, I thought of trying to bail out through there, but then because it was too low to do any bailing out. So I rode it down, and I was lucky that there was a lot of loose snow on the ground. And
you rode it down to the ground?
Yeah, I flew it down, and the snow come barreling up through into the cockpit area and put out the fire right around me. But there was the only way out of there was a cargo door about halfway back down the fuselage, and of course that was on fire. So I just took a deep breath and put my hands over my face and just ran through that thing. And I ran out of the glider, and I was afraid, because I knew all that ammunition was on board, and started running from it. I got just about the edge of the trees, and I just like a premonition. I laid down flat and started crawling. About that time, that glider blew, and boy, she really blew.
What blew up?
Oh, bang, yes, yeah. And of course, that saved me at the time being, because it just no time at all. The Germans were there, and they started looking at the wreckage there, and I think they assumed that whoever was in it got blown up with it. And
were there any others with there?
No, I was all by myself.
You, all by yourself?
Yeah, but there were other gliders went down around me, but I made my way in there, deep woods there, and wind was blowing, and so it covered your tracks up quite rapidly. And there were these pine trees with long boughs, and kind of around each trunk of that pine tree there was kind of a sheltered area. And so I crawled on one of those and hid out, and German patrols came by quite close a number of times, but I had some rations, and my wife had sent me a little fruit cake just shortly before that for Christmas, and I cut that in two, and I had half of that fruit cake along with me, and that really helped sustain me there for a few days. I hid from the Germans, but I hid there for a week and was hoping, of course, the Americans would overrun the position, but they didn't. But I realized in a week I was getting really, really weak, and I figured I better either get up and walk back to the Americans or get captured or get shot or something. I didn't want to lay out there and freeze to death. I'd been wounded a little bit and lost quite a bit of blood. So I started walking, but I didn't walk too far, and I ran into a German, young German soldier out there. He took a couple of shots at me, but I held my hands and tried to be calm, and he calmed down then and marched me in. I was walking right straight into a German command post. But so I was with those fellows for 2 or 3 days, and one time they had another fellow, that a field artillery sergeant they'd captured. He was a little wounded, couldn't walk very well, but he was in there with me. And one day, there's a lot of small arms shooting around there. And one time when somebody came and shouted something, all these clerks and typists and they had to work on the CP, they all grabbed their guns and ran out. There was kind of a stone wall there, and they all took positions there and started firing down the valley. Well, and this other fellow, nobody was there. We could have got away even, but we thought, well, boy, the Americans, we just lay down flat. The Americans are going to be here in a minute. They're going to overrun these fellows, and we're going to be out of this thing free. But it didn't work that way at all. They repulsed the American attack, and next day they marched us out of there.
What kind of clothes did you have on when you...
I had good warm clothes on, very good warm clothes on. I had woolen underwear, and I had airborne suit jump clothes on, and I had a heavy sweater, and I had a good wool scarf. I had 2 pair of pants on, and I had good boots. Unfortunately, after the second place I got to, where the Germans stripped me down, took away all those extra things I had and my good things, and gave me some old...
Where were you shot down relative to some other bigger city?
Well, I was shot down, I suppose, to be about 7 or 8 kilometers from Bastogne. I'd say it'd be west, southwest probably, near the little town of Saint-Vith. And near another little town, I can't pronounce the name of it, was Limerge, some Limourge, something.
How far
like
were you from the German border, from the German country?
Well, we were in Belgium, right close to Luxembourg, so I suppose we were, I don't know, 30, 40 miles, I would guess, from Germany.
And from the coast, you were quite a ways?
Quite a ways, yeah. We, the Germans that picked me up were good. I just have to say they were very fair to me. They fed me, and they tried to give some attention because my wounds were at this time were a week old, and they looked at them, they rubbed some salve on them and stuff like that. And when and this other fellow, we got sent over then a few kilometers where they had a bunch of other German prisoners. American prisoners, and put in with them. And we were there for a couple of days, and so one day they came and announced we were going to march us out of there. And there's one of the experiences of the war that for me was different, was that there were 8 officers besides myself that were there, the highest ranked officer being a major, and I think 2 first lieutenants, the rest of them were all second lieutenants. I was a flight officer, the lowest rank of the bunch. They were some kind of artillery officers. I didn't know enough about the other branches of the service to know what they were, but anyhow, the Germans came, got ready to start the march, and they said, we've got transport here for the wounded. We've also got enough transport here to take the officers, except one officer has to stay behind and be in charge of the men that were going to march. And this major, he looked up and down, looked at his men, looked at me, and he said, Mr. Flight Officer, he said, you're it. And so that was when an Army Air Force officer who didn't have any real experience in that sort of thing. Suddenly I found myself in charge of those men, and we lost an awful lot of men on the way in the march. We marched 22 days. They gave us
Marched 22 days?
Yeah.
Where did you march to?
Marched to Limburg, the sweat box at Limburg. You probably were there too. Yeah. Their interrogation center.
North of Frankfurt?
Yeah, it was up near Frankfurt.
Yeah.
But we marched 22 days. And they gave us a loaf of bread and can of cheese, and they said, this is going to have to last you for this march. We didn't know it was going to be that long. We thought they were talking 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And of course, a lot of the fellows had anything to eat for several days, and of course, this bread and these cans of cheese were gone in a matter of hours.
Yeah, sure.
And from then on, it was this was the worst part of the war for me. That
was winter now.
Winter,
Snow.
had a very bad winter, very cold. And not
how many were there in your group now that you're?
Well, there was, I just can't. I think there were 300 and some to start out with. We lost a lot of guys on the way up, though.
You were going to the interrogation center.
Yeah.
Okay.
That we.
How'd you lose them? I mean, why?
Well, I think it was from pneumonia. I don't know. They just be dead in the morning. That we never was in a heated building, and we'd got hot, you know, and wet. Sometimes it would be slushy, and the guys seemed like, especially some of the paratroopers we had, it seemed like they all had just terrible colds. I suppose they had pneumonia, probably had hypothermia, I don't know. But at the time being, we just thought it was pneumonia they were dying from. But
they just left them there, or did they just march?
No, we left them. We left them there.
Yeah.
We left them there. We took some of them. We took dog tags from, but then we talked over and decided we better leave the dog tags with them, you know. And
I can explain what the dog tag is. Some may not.
Oh, their dog tags were 2 little tags that you had a chain or a strong string or something you wore around your neck, and the idea was that.
With your name on it, number.
Your name and number on there. That if something happened to you, they'd know who you were.
Yeah.
And we marched, and the conditions were just terrible. Like I said, it was just very, very cold. It was one of the coldest winters on record over there, and the countryside was just devastated. The bombers had fixed up all the towns practically. That the Germans had very little electricity or gas or anything like that, and very little railroad traffic, and the highways were bad shape too. And one thing that kind of pulled us through was that they'd using a lot of horse-drawn and truck-drawn traffic. They were taking apples and potatoes, and the roads were so bad they hit these frozen ruts, and some of the potatoes would fall off the trucks. And I told my wife that I never would have thought a few months after we were married that I'd be fighting other American officers for potatoes that fell off a truck, but I have done that. I hate to admit it.
Yeah.
And but anyway, and then we got a couple places where we were just really down and out, and the civilians gave us food. I don't think we'd have made it otherwise. And I've often wished I could remember where those towns were and went back and somehow tried to look up some of those people and thank them for because they literally saved us.
You marched during the daytime then, and slept, tried to rest at night?
Yeah. And I've heard other stories. I didn't see this myself, but the guards were tired too, exhausted like we are.
Yeah.
That I've heard other prisoners say that the guards gave them their rifles, made them carry their rifles, because they were so darn tired from this march. And we marched from daylight to dark, and nothing to eat, except what we found beside the road and what the people gave us.
Your morale must have been pretty low then, or?
Well, surprising.
You lose a lot of weight on this?
Yes, I did lose a lot of weight. After I never did get weight till after I'd been out of the prison camp for some time.
Oh.
I weighed 128. Then I weighed 185 when I got shot down.
I see.
And even when I got home, I only had a 26-inch waist. My wife had a 28-inch waist, which she was a slim girl, but that was really funny. But unfortunately, I didn't stay that way very long, as you noticed that I recovered my weight. I didn't recover my muscle structure the way I should have, but I think it was not good losing all that weight. And if I had my life to live over again, I would have tried to get some kind of a therapy program to build my muscles at the same time put my weight back on. But
how did any of the men kill themselves, or were they shot by the Germans on the trip?
When we were we had one guy stuck in the leg with a bayonet by one of the guards. This guard had a sled he'd picked up someplace. He had some loot, and some of these guards were apparently getting their chance to march with us while they get to go home on leave or something. And he had some stuff apparently he was trying to take home. He had it in his sled. And so he'd always make a prisoner pull it. And of course we were just really tired out. And so he'd come to this one boy from down south someplace, and he said, pull the sled, you know, or in German conveyed to him,
Yeah.
pull the sled. This guy conveyed to him, and they wouldn't. And boy, he stuck him in the leg with a bayonet. And the guy pulled the sled. But we didn't, in fact, when we got to Frankfurt, well, we had an incident there where the guards really saved us from, they come to march us out to get on a train to go to was the name Limburg, I think.
Yeah, Limburg.
And anyhow,
Was this in town, the town of Frankfurt, at the railroad station?
yeah,
there?
it was a right near there someplace. But anyway, where we're supposed to be, the English came the night before and bombed the place. And here the train didn't come, but we were out there, and here a bunch of these German women came that apparently were come on some kind of commuter train, and here their train they were supposed to go on wasn't there. Well, these women, they started looking us over, and next thing they know, they picked up bricks from these bombed-out buildings, and they came at us. And if it wouldn't have been for the guards, why, they would have finished us off. And the guards finally fired over their heads, and that's the way they stopped them.
They had put guards around the whole group then. How many were there in your group by this time?
Well, I'd say by that time we was down to 200 or maybe a little less.
Yeah.
And but then we got down there to Limburg, and we got all separated then. I saw any of those people.
Yeah.
And I got sent on up to the air officers' prison at Barth, which is north of Berlin, about 80 miles.
How long were you in the interrogation center?
I think I was there 5 days. And the only thing that the Germans wanted to know from me was they wanted details in this snatch program I was just telling you about.
Yeah.
And I wasn't any expert on that. Fortunately, I didn't know nothing about it, but it didn't do any good to tell them that. I'll have to tell you another kind of humorous incident in connection with that when I was appointed a flight officer, my serial number was 1111, you know, and just 4 ones. And
yeah.
so the Germans, they say, your rank, name, and serial number. And I'd say 1111. They said, no, their army number, you know. I had such a time with that. I just about decided to pick up a fake number and give them. But
did you have that on your, well, yeah.
Got up my dog tag.
I see.
And, but anyhow, we got to the camp, and the camp was just...
Now, you went to Barth?
Barth, yeah.
By rail?
Yeah, by rail, yeah.
Could you tell us about that railroad trip?
Well, the railroad trip was kind of bad. That at Limburg, the last thing before we left there, they gave us cigarettes. And even guys that didn't smoke started lighting up the cigarettes, you know, and we got this darn train. And they had this compartment, I think it was made for about 6 people, but they must have had at least 10 people in there, and everyone was smoking. And it's funny, we didn't asphyxiate ourselves that were choking with darn cigarette smoke. And then trying to, I can't remember how long the train trip was. It seemed like it was several hours, but maybe it wasn't. I mean, several days, but maybe it wasn't.
Yeah.
And incidentally, before we got on this train, we were on another train, a train put in a boxcar. And this was very bad. I think this was up by Berlin, and we were in an air raid in this thing, and we looked out and we could see through the cracks in the boxcar, we could see fires all around us. And boy, we thought we were goners. It started getting
in Berlin.
Smoke. Yeah. But again, the German civilians come and pushed by hand. They come and pushed these cars that we were in and pushed us out of that area.
Pushed you away from
Yeah.
it.
So I have to give credit to as much as I didn't like the Germans.
No.
And regard them as enemy, that some of the civilians really
Saved your life.
saved our lives, yeah. But
Now, when did you get to Barth? Where's Barth now?
Barth is about 80 miles due north of Berlin, up on the North Sea. It's right across from Sweden, or Baltic. I can't remember if it's the Baltic or the North Sea. Maybe it's the Baltic. But anyhow, they let us off the railroad station down there, which I think was about a mile and a half from the prison camp, and they turned loose these German Shepherd dogs. Now, I'm a dog lover, but still to this day, I don't like German Shepherd dogs. They'd make you start trotting, and if you got tired and started slowing down, the doggone dogs would nip your calves, your legs, your heels, you know.
That is, you walked from the train station to the camp.
To the camp, yeah. And they opened the gate and took in there.
What happened then when you got to the camp there?
Well, I got assigned to
before you got into the assignment, you get deloused or anything, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you're.
I can't remember. No. I just can't remember.
No.
That I got in the camp, and I got this room, and I thought, my gosh, you know, this can't be serious. The room was, I think, about 12 by 20, and there was 24 guys in there. That was the 24th. And they had the bunks were, half the room about was taken up by 3 tiers of bunks. And we had a rule in our room, I don't know about the rest of them, but we'd, so one third of us have to stay in the bunks. Each time we took turns, you know, that in fact, during the daylight hours, the third time you'd either have to be in your bunk or outside because it's so crowded down below. We had these long tables that we prepared our food, what there was of it, and played cards and things like that in the daytime. And then at night, of course, we had went early to bed.
Now this camp. Could you tell us a little bit how the camp was built or organized there?
Well, this camp, we understood that this had been this was a German Air Force camp that was made for Air Force personnel, and at one time it had been a model prison camp. That I'd heard that they'd had theater, and they had mess halls, and they had entertainment and volleyball and softball and raised gardens in the summertime and all that. But by the time I got there, this was all gone. The mess hall had burned down, and every day they'd bring a box of journey potatoes, bread, and they then divide it up according to rooms.
How would they bring it? How would they bring the potatoes into the camp there?
In wagons.
Wagons.
Yeah.
Pulled by horses or?
Pulled by horses, yeah, as far as I can remember, yeah. And they were very carefully counted out these loaves of bread, believe me. And then the fellows had been getting Red Cross packages quite a bit, so a lot of fellows in our room there, they had cigarettes. And I was a hard smoker in those days, but I vowed that if I couldn't have all the cigarettes I wanted, I wasn't going to have any, so I quit smoking it abruptly. And it was real funny. I was in there a few weeks, and I got yellow jaundice. I took over to the hospital. Well, the hospital wasn't a hospital at all. It was just another barracks that they heated up. It was much more comfortable. In other words, it was nice and warm. But the food wasn't much better. But anyhow, I ran into a fellow from Fargo there that was recuperating, and he'd got a package from home with a carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes in it. He gave me a package of Lucky Strike cigarettes. And I got somebody to light one up for me, and I laid there in my bunk in that hospital. I smoked all 20 of those cigarettes, one the end of the other. But it's surprising that the only thing there was plenty of where I was around was cigarettes. Of course, a lot of guys didn't smoke, and they used them for trading stock. And we didn't, about Easter Sunday, as I recall, we got, I think, 2 issues of these Red Cross boxes. Red Cross box was a little box a little bit bigger than the Cracker Jack box that had in it condensed, concentrated food. They had a chocolate bar, a D-bar. They had milk, powdered milk in it. They had some crackers, and I think they had a fruit bar or something like that in them, if I can recall. I know they were just lifesavers. And the fellows that had been there a long time, they were very ingenious about making things out of these. They'd make prune whip between the powdered milk they had in the prune fruit bars, and they'd make some kind of god-awful cake, they called it. And but anyhow, we started eating better than about Easter Sunday. And when
Did you get rid of that yellow jaundice then, or?
yeah, I got rid of it. I was very sick with it for a while. There was an English doctor that took care of me, and there wasn't any medicine.
No.
He had no medicine for it, but they took potatoes, and I still don't know what the chemical properties of potatoes were, but it made me eat the charcoal from these potatoes.
The charcoal from the potatoes?
Potatoes, yeah. And anyhow, I recovered. Of course, I haven't been able to get blood or anything since, but I guess it's one of my disabilities that I don't get compensated for.
What about your activities during the daytime now during this camp?
Boy, it was...
well, now the camp was divided into compounds, wasn't it?
Yeah, and we were in a newer compound that was the one compound that they had church service in it, chapel services, and one fell from my outfit. They'd been shot down in the Holland invasion. Was in North 2, and he was and I were good friends, and we'd go there to the church services, but I hate to say it, but we'd sit in the back and visit, instead of participating in the services like we should have been, but it was the only chance we had to communicate.
Now, did they, anyone ever try and get out there, or?
No, sir. As far as I know, that they had an escape committee, and we were briefed when we first got in there by the Americans, and they told us that well, the way the war was, why they just didn't think it was very likely that we'd have a successful escape. But they said if we did decide to escape, we're supposed to submit a plan to the escape committee, and they would approve it or make suggestions for it or something like that. But in my knowledge, while I was there, nobody tried to escape.
What about the washroom and bathing and
Well, we got
toilet facilities and so on?
We had at the end of the barracks I was in was a kind of a washroom. It was also a latrine. The latrine wasn't hooked up to a sewer or anything. It was hooked up to a bunch of containers, which I guess these are Polish prisoners that had to come and empty them every day and take them out of there. And we got showers occasionally, not very often. And at first we did very well, but we got towards the end of the war we got lice in our barracks real bad, and we couldn't get rid of them until we got to Camp Lucky Strike and got deloused after the war was over in Europe.
What kind of a latrine did they have for the whole camp there? Did they have a big one that you...
No, these were a lot that I know that they had one in our barracks. That's all I know about
That's all,
it.
yeah. What about washing your face or something?
Yeah, they had, in fact, I can't remember what kind of a thing. I think it was running water down the latrine. I think you could wash and shave down there, and surprisingly, they gave you toothbrushes and they gave you razors, and the Red Cross, when we left the interrogation center, they gave us a little kind of like a suitcase with Red Cross supplies in it. I think it was even a pair of
pajamas. Do you have toilet paper?
Yeah.
It must have been.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How did the guys get along in your room in your camp? And so
Well,
on?
I've often thought back about that, how well we got along, in view of the circumstances, that how well we got along, that we never had a single fist fight or anything like that, that we had some arguments sometimes. We had arguments between, of all things, between the guys that flew B-24s and the guys that flew B-17s. We'd get into shouting matches sometimes. And well, once in a while we get a little, we had some Southern boys, we get a little Civil War talk going. And it's a few accusations hurled back and forth, but by and large that they were, and these guys were high-level guys. Most of them were college-trained people, and they knew what we were up against, and everybody bent over backwards to get along, I'd say. The only fight I saw was after the Russians liberated the camp. We had a few days there.
Well, let's see. Why don't you take it back to where you, where the war is coming? Say, maybe we should take a little break here, and you could rest your voice.
No, well, maybe I'll have a little drink of water if I may. When we heard every morning they'd run us out for roll call, and outside, and then I hadn't been there very long, especially the winters, we hear this dull rumble in the distance.
In the wintertime?
In the wintertime, they say, that's Russian artillery. And so we do PT out there, and we'd have this thing we call, "Come on, Joe, come on, Joe." That's what the Americans call the Russian soldiers. And the Germans, for a long time, they didn't know what we were talking about. Then they got really upset when they knew that we were summoning the Russians there. But anyhow, the noise of the artillery got louder and louder. And
now they were coming from the east.
Yeah. And so we knew something was going to happen, and we started. The weather started getting better too, and which was merciful because we get outside then and walk around, and it wasn't so bad in the wintertime. It was cold and you had to stay inside all the time or freeze, you know. And so things started getting more, after Easter Sunday, things started getting better. And this artillery getting louder and louder, and I can't remember the exact date. Yeah, I remember President Roosevelt died, and things seemed to all happen in a hurry there, and the next thing we knew, we'd had this radio in the camp that we'd get news on it from the British broadcasting system, and so we knew quite a bit where they picked up maps, and they passed around from one compound to the other, so we could see about where the Russians were and where the Americans were. And the story was that the Americans were only about 45 kilometers away from us when the war ended. Now, I don't know if that was true or not, but the Russians came up and swept through the place that took over this camp that we were at, and the Russians were pretty rough people. My observations were that this must have been a field artillery outfit that liberated us. They came in, a lot of horse-drawn equipment. They'd have a horse, they'd have 2 horses, some of them have 4 horses on, and a wagon piled high with loot they'd picked up, and a journeyman man and woman riding in each wagon, and also feed for the horses. And then back of them often to be a little field artillery piece of some sort they'd be going. And the column had just barely been moving, I don't think they were making 3 miles an hour even as they came, the ones we saw come through us that liberated us there.
That was separate from the Russian army then?
Well, yeah, it was, well, this was
part of it.
This was part of the Russian army, yeah. And they'd, at night, they'd start drinking, and boy, I tell you, they raised Cain, those Russian soldiers, and we heard a lot of shooting and shouting and things like that. So they no question, they did a lot of damage in the civilian population around there.
At Barth?
At Barth, yeah.
How far was Barth away from here? A couple miles? Or?
Oh, a couple miles, I guess, that we could look. I remember looking out the various, there was a big church in Barth that was kind of the landmark for us we all looked at. And I don't know how far it was. I remember we marched, when we were finally liberated, they marched us out of there to the Barth airport. It wasn't too far. I guess about 45-minute walk, so I suppose what would that make, 2 miles or 3 miles maybe. That I was going to say that we're talking about fighting, that when the Russians came and turned us, liberated us, why, of course, everybody immediately we broke out of our particular units we were assigned to, our barracks, and of course the Polish people, then they quit collecting these honey buckets in the latrines. So one thing, that the guys were making scrap lumber, making little outdoor privies all around the outside of them. And right next to us in our same building was some fellows and got a hold of some scrap lumber, and they made, from their window, in their room, they made a kind of runway down to the ground. And some other fellows have been over and looking around, they found a German flare gun. And they were fooling around with this, and this flare gun went off, and there was a fellow just walking down the runway over this thing next door, and the flare gun hit his jacket, didn't hurt him, the shell. It exploded in his face, and he was really mad, and he got up and come over swinging at the guy that did this, and this fellow was with him trying to explain to him that he didn't do it on purpose. Next thing, there was a real fight going on between the 24 guys from each room, about 50 guys out there slugging it out. You could believe that, they're all by all the war, all the years and months, some of those guys have been in there, never in a fight. Yeah. Then they're finally liberated, why they had to start bloodying each other's noses. We might mention that in the camp itself, that the guards they had strict rules, and I think while I was there, I think there were 2 people shot by guards. That in both cases, I think it was we had air raid, when the air raid sirens blew, the orders were you get inside and you close your shutters. I think both these times people went out. They said one fellow probably committed suicide, that he went out on purpose because he wanted the guards to kill him. Another guy that sure just forgot that an air raid was on, stepped outside, and this old German guard there with a sharp eye, he dropped him. But there were a few people died in the prison camp, nobody in our room.
What about any other prisoners around there from other nationalities around your camp?
Yes, there were a few. There were some English boys that come over and visit us once in a while from, I don't know what, they weren't in our barracks, but I was very impressed by them because they knew so much more about the history of the United States than we did. That I'd take a lot of history when I was out here at the university. I liked history. But they'd sit down, they'd start talking about what Lee did wrong in his campaign and what Sherman should have done, and they were much more familiar with the Civil War tactics than we were, and it made me a little bit ashamed of us. Yeah. But they were very high-level people, these English officers. And I know we had kind of a PA system. They'd play American records, and there was kind of country western records. They played a lot of it. All these English boys, they just deplored that. They thought that was awful. But I remember once in a while you hear them telling jokes to each other. English jokes are just something else that we keep on waiting for the punchline. They'd tell a joke, and they'd laugh and laugh and laugh. It was so funny, and Americans would keep on waiting for the punchline. But they were good fellows. I liked them.
What happened the day you were liberated there, or that night, or whenever?
We had a fellow in our room that we had to wake him up and shake him to get him a roll call. He never would wake up. He'd really love to sleep in. Well, that morning, of course, the night before we knew something was going on, we heard the Germans had demolished a couple of buildings there and burned some records, and the artillery sound was close, so we knew something was going to happen. But this fellow, I'll tell you about, that never had to be forcibly woke up. Of all things, that particular morning he woke up and he said, come back to his fellow, something going on out there. What do you mean? He said, there's an American MP in that guard tower. And just the whole room just instantly woke up. Here's this one guy that hadn't been awake his whole life until broad daylight. He woke up and he was the one that tipped us off to something. And just about that same time, while there was just a buzz started from the whole camp, boy, talk about elation, they ran out. And apparently the Germans had told the senior American officers they were going to leave, and they had put Americans up there in the towers and trying to keep some semblance of order, but of course that soon broke down. I remember that we destroyed the camp very shortly after when we found that the Russians were not quite what we'd hoped they were going to be as far as allies, and our senior officer gave us order to tear down the guard towers and to demolish the barbed wire fence, which we did in short order, much to the Russians' unhappiness. They didn't like that at all. But in just a couple hours, while the guard houses were down and the fences rolled up in a big bonfires all over the place. And some of the fellows took off walking then, but most of us stayed there. And the Russians at first, they said they didn't want us to leave because we'd been infiltrated by German soldiers. There were a bunch of Germans in with us in American uniforms. They said we'd all have to be identified before we could leave. And then the other rumor came they were going to march back to the Black Sea and out that way, and we didn't want that at all. And so we were quite nervous there for a while. But I think the day or two after the liberation, I remember a couple of American P-47s flew over low and they circled around, come back low again. And we knew then that the Americans knew we were there. And then, a major and a couple sergeants came then in a Jeep a day or two later. A lot of guys tried to write letters right quick and send with them to take back to send to their folks, but the Germans caught up with them and they beat up on the major, the Russians did, and took the letters. And had several bad things happen up there. That one fellow that was in our room, he'd went downtown, and this Russian officer could speak a little English, came up to him and a couple other boys, says, come on over. They had in the jail, they had some fellows over there in American uniforms. And they said, we think these are Germans in American uniforms. So they went up there and talked to these guys. These guys couldn't talk a word of English. They were. And so they told the Russians, they're pulling a fast one on you. They're not. And the Russians just shot them right in the spot. And these guys felt awful bad about that. They said they got back. They said if they'd known that, they would have said they were Americans. That the Russians had no. There wasn't no trial or nothing. They just killed him right in the spot.
Did you get any letters when you were in camp?
No, sir. I never got a thing. And it was kind of ironic the way things turned out that I had my two younger brothers both in combat, and I was worried about them, of course, and worried about my wife, my folks, and we got out of there in May and went to Camp Lucky Strike, and finally I got over to England, finally got on a LST convoy of ships going back with other POWs in it. And but in this convoy, we had LCIs in the convoy too. And we got just about inside of the American continent, and a typhoon or something came up. We had to turn and run back out to sea on account of these darn LCIs couldn't take heavy water. And so as a result, it took us 22 days to make the crossing.
What happened to your brothers? Did they?
My brothers both, in fact, finally got on July 7th, finally got to Patrick Henry, Virginia, got a hold of a telephone, called up and found out my brothers had both survived the war. One boy had been wounded and spent a lot of time in the hospital, but the other fellow was okay. And he'd been, and this boat had been sunk by a suicide plane over there in the Bay of Japan someplace, but he didn't get hurt. He was picked up soon. So anyhow, I found out finally after all this time, I had no way of finding out where all my family was.
Say, I see this little medal here. If they could show that, kind of interesting person you can maybe tell about it. If they can show it on the television.
I don't know if it'll show up or not, but we have a Glider Pilots Association, a national one, and we have a broke down by a state organization, and this says their North Dakota State Commanders, Pershing Carlson of the National World War II Glider Pilots Association, was explained to Elmer here. This is kind of a limited honor because I'm the only glider pilot in North Dakota anymore. That there were 6 or 7 of us, but they've all either passed on or moved out of the state or something. So anyhow, that is
well,
my badge of office.
Yeah, well, that's pretty fancy. Yeah.
I might mention about the glider pilots that we had about 5,000 trained glider pilots. About half of them were killed in the war, and
about half.
About half, yeah. And since then, about half have passed on. So there's not too many the original bunch left anymore.
I think, of course, those pilots that flew the B-24s and 25s and 17s, I think those crews, about half of those were killed too in the war. Of course, they had multiple missions. The average mission was we flew 16. Well, of course, yours was a one-way. You were on the 4th one, was it? That you,
yeah, 4th one. Yeah,
4th one.
I got shot.
I didn't know they had more than one mission. But
oh yeah, we flew into Normandy, and we flew into southern France, and we flew into a place called Tournai, Belgium, and we flew into Holland, and then we flew into Bastogne, and then after then another big one that went across the Rhine in March of 1945, and we lost a lot of glider pilots then too.
Did you? I'm going to say that these glider pilots. Now, that organization is still in existence here in the
yes,
States.
Yeah, very strong. Yeah, and we meet every
now,
year.
they don't have a glider training school here now, do they?
No, they quit gliders way back in about 1946.
Yeah.
The only one thing that I was in the 94th Troop Carrier Squadron, and somebody told me that a few years ago the cadets down at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, that one class somewhere to pick out. They pick out one certain organization. They're supposed to try to emulate that through their training, and they picked out our 94th Squadron, which we felt real good about because it's really easy for those kids to pick out a fighter squadron or bomber squadron instead of a troop carrier outfit that doesn't have as much glamour in it as a bomber squadron or a fighter squadron.
Now, when you landed that glider, were you prepared as an infantryman then to fight or to?
Oh yes,
I mean, you had a rifle and
well equipped,
ammunition and everything with
and
you.
well trained, yeah.
Extra food and water and so on.
We knew how to take care of ourselves on the ground.
Did you have sort of an organization then when you hit the ground? You had someone that was maybe...
we didn't. They tried a couple of times to Owen in Holland. They organized a bunch of glider pilots and tried to put them up to hold a certain piece of ground, but there were so many tanks advancing on it that the glider pilots decided it was their own best interest to leave, and I know there was kind of some criticism afterwards that we shouldn't have left, but we did leave. And because we didn't have anything, there were tanks, we didn't have anything except 30 caliber carbines and 45 automatic pistols, and just not to fight a tank with.
Yeah.
And but in the crossing of the Rhine, where a bunch of glider pilots did form a unit, and they took a defensive place there, and it's one of the few things in the war where there was a major engagement where it was all officer corps, and the Americans, yeah. But they did stand the Germans off. And
they were all glider pilots.
Yeah, all glider pilots, yeah. But they had some bazookas and things like that they'd taken out of their gliders, so they weren't just small arms.
Did any of the men that on the glider jump out? Were they paratroopers?
No. We hauled paratroopers a number of times. The paratroopers didn't like it. They'd rather jump than. And one of the unfair things during the war was that the glider infantry had to do everything the paratroopers did, practically. And for a long time, they didn't get the jump pay. You know, the paratroopers got extra pay the same as pilots did, you know, in the war. But towards the end of the war, they did relent and give the glider infantry the same consideration pay-wise they give the paratroopers. Paratroopers were a good outfit. I had a lot of admiration for them, but they also had the best public relations people in the world, kind of like the Marine Corps, you know.
Yeah. Did you ever go back to any of those areas after the war?
No, sir, I never have. I was very sorry that about 25 years ago, our outfit, someone went back over there, and they even found the place where our squadron was shot down. One fellow, one of the pilots there, found a couple of they were middle-aged men by that time, but they'd been boys that found his wrecked airplane. It stole a bunch of things off the airplane, and he got a couple of souvenirs back. But I've never been back, and some of them have been back 2 or 3 times. I've never had any great desire to go back, to be perfectly honest about it, because to me it was a time of extreme sadness.
Now, do you belong to any organization, a POW organization, that is the camp organization? You know, they have
No, we don't. Yes, we have a Prisoners of War Association.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah, one in like you.
Yeah.
You were state commander for a while, weren't you?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was state commander. A couple of terms back, I guess.
Yeah. That's for all the ex-prisoners of war in North Dakota.
Yeah, we have about I think in our organization about 145 or so now. That we have a state convention every year, and then we broke down into the state. We have 4 sub-organizations sort of that we meet occasionally, but the fellows are all getting up in years now. It isn't as easy to get together as it used to be, and I don't know how long we'll survive as a state organization, but it is fun to get together. I've made some good friends in the organization.
Well, I think it's valuable that we can get, especially now when we had a cooperation of the aerospace section here of the university and the university itself, to make these tapes of these men that fought in World War II. You know, they're soon going to be all gone.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
This is a first-person interview of someone that was actually in a battle. I mean, all these prisoners of war were in a battle of some type. You know,
well, that's why I kind of welcome this opportunity, because young people I talk to, my grandchildren, especially glider pilot and the war, and they say, "What the heck was a glider pilot?" Yeah. And I realize that unless somebody tells the story, this is soon going to be all lost.
Sure.
And so I do welcome this chance to tell a little about
the
glider program.
I'm glad you're here, because I think it's valuable for for your children and family and so on.
I might mention just a little bit about my family, if I could. That
sure.
When I was down at Bowman Field, I ran into a gal there that I immediately thought a lot of, and before too long I'd asked her to marry me after the war, and so she agreed to, and then we didn't go overseas right away after I got through training there, and so I got leave one day, so I go back up there and asked her to get married, so we got married, but I got my orders changed shortly thereafter. And
were you married in Bismarck or Mandan? Or?
No, married down in Kentucky.
Oh yeah, Bowman Field, Kentucky. Yeah, I was stationed in Bowman Field.
And she came up, spent the war with my folks, and we've got 3 kids now. 3 kids now. They're all grown up.
Where are they located?
They're located. The boy is in Mandan, near us. The oldest son, he's in insurance business, and my second son lives in Bismarck. He's an attorney, and my daughter lives in Bismarck. Her husband, she's works for the Bismarck Y, and we have 5 grandchildren, which we've been very fortunate. So many of our friends, their children have moved to other states, and they're hard to get to see their grandchildren. We watched our grandchildren grow up, which has been one of the privileges of getting.
How has your health been since you?
Been pretty fair.
Yeah.
Pretty fair. I can't say great. I've had some surgeries, and I've got health problems right now. And
how's the VA treated you, Veterans Administration?
Well, I've got real mixed emotions. I'll say this right now, that when I came back from the war, I got just shabby treatment from the VA, just shabby treatment. They said, well, I tried to tell them what's wrong with me. I laid out there on the ground, you know, and
Sure.
froze one knee, and even a young man, arthritis is stiff.
Yeah.
They said, well, you got to get some, you got somebody or something you can write a letter about this. And I'm laying out there all by myself there in the snowbank, and my buddies that were with me are all killed, and no sympathy, no nothing. And it wasn't until till this POW MIA concern came up in the Vietnam situation that I got called down to Fargo and given an examination. And one thing I did get out of was I get free dental treatment and free eyeglasses. And I get some 10% disability. And for scars, which I can't, I tried to tell them the other things that happened to me. It doesn't make any difference. For my scars, I get 10% disability, and people say I should go back and reopen it and go after that. But I tell you, Elmer, I'm just too proud to go down there with my hat in my hand. And
Sure, big.
when I was down there, one young fellow come to me and he started talking to me, and he asked me about kind of personal things about, I'd had a bad mishap when I got home, that I choked my wife one night. I grabbed her by the throat and wrestled her to the floor and said, name, rank, or serial number. And my dad heard the commotion. He came in and broke it up, but it wasn't a good thing, you know.
Now, how's your wife's health? Been pretty good?
Good.
Yeah.
I don't like to talk about this other thing, so
No.
if we change the subject, I guess it'd be a little better.
Yeah. Well, I think the POWs have been good citizens since they come back to North Dakota here.
I'm surprised at how well they've done, you know, that a lot of them have overcome serious health problems, especially the Japanese boys, the boys who were Japanese prisoners that they had.
And they, they didn't burn the flag or marched against all these organizations, or they haven't.
That's right.
They didn't.
They appreciate their country, you know.
Appreciate the country, and they were loyal. All of them have been loyal to their country and to their families and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's kind of hard, I know, for young people to understand, you know, about the resentment we have to these flag burners and things like that. But I could say, Dad, that doesn't make any difference. The flag's just a piece of cloth, you know. And I said, no, it isn't. There's something else besides that there.
That's right, yeah. Well, do you have anything else to say, Pershing, before we close it here? I was glad you were here, and I hope that your children and grandchildren especially, and great-grandchildren will enjoy this visit we had here.
Well, I think that you and the aerospace people down here are certainly be commended for a project like this, and I think it's overdue.
Well, the aerospace people have done most of the work. I mean, they're the ones that should be commended.
Well, that's good.
They've allowed us this time and facilities, and personnel, and so on. Yeah.
Well, we'll be looking forward to seeing the results of the tape, especially when you put the big tape together.
Well, we'll do that sometime later on when we get. Right now, we're just more or less taking each individual.